go. Get that going. All right, recording is going, and let me do screen share. All right. Desktop. And we'll make sure Blender's active. All right, and give me 1 second, guys. I'm just going to turn my projector on for my other students, and then I'll be back in a second. Wi-Fi is being sketchy for you. All right. Okay, I'm back. Projector is starting. All the things I have to juggle. Getting projector on, getting screen share working. Obviously, there's a progress check today, guys, right? So the assignment for today, as it always is we have one day is a progress check, the other day is a mini quiz. It's just a great way to kind of keep you guys on task for your models and get feedback for those before you turn in the final project. And the mini quizzes, like we said, are just a great way to reinforce a lot of fundamental things, right? Kind of like, let me scale this down a little bit, just because the projector kind of cuts some of that stuff off, so it's always good to kind of make sure the whole thing's visible for my students watching on a projector. I think that covers it pretty well. All right, getting right about there should work, I think. Okay. Maybe a little bit more. Okay. Okay. So where we left off was with this, right? We kind of explored the idea of how we could, flat shade, right? Certain polygons. So you could easily go in here and select specific polygons to apply flat shade to, right? So if you go to 3 and you grab some faces, you can always right-click and you'll see that there is a shade flat, right? That'll actually kind of add that flat, non-smooth shading to it. Of course, you can select the whole object and do that shade smooth to it. And then, of course, we saw that there is, the ability to go into the little green triangle here and turn on things like auto smooth for your object, right? Just to make sure it's going to kind of shade the bevels pretty well. And usually give it kind of a nice little degree as well. And that's one of the things. And we kind of saw that we worked with some n-gons here. You see we've got some n-gons here and there. Because I wanted to show you that, the extrude tool over here, right? If you hold down the left mouse button, the extrude tool, you can actually use extrude manifold. Like I said, you guys don't have to use that. That is kind of one of those things where it was more just to get you guys exposed to the idea of that tool working and how that works. Than having to use it, right? If you really want to keep this all quads and just use regular extrusions, because you could build this with all quads really easily, actually, you could do that. And that's not a problem. If you guys choose to do that, that is totally fine. I just want to make sure you guys got a cool demonstration of how that tool works, right? How the extrude manifold is one of the new features in 2.9. I want to make sure you guys got to see that, right? It's useful. Sometimes you might want to use it for certain things. It's kind of like basically like SketchUp's tool. It's a neat little new extrude option that you can use or not use. All right. So in this case, I did. We also started doing some curve stuff, right? And I did want to talk about these curves some more, right? So I'm going to go to 4 for object, and I can click on this NURBS curve, right? Because you see that's a NURBS curve in your outliner here, right there, right? And remember, we just end up creating NURBS curves in object mode. We go to 4 for object, right? We go to add curve, right? You can add a NURBS curve. It does drop it in the center here. And what we do is we go to vertex mode, right? 1 for vertex mode. And that will allow you then to select those vertices and move them around so that you can move your curve over here without moving your center, right? There's kind of a little orange guy right in the center, right there. That's your center pivot for the whole object. So if you want to move your objects around without moving your pivot, select either all the polygons, all the vertices for that specific object or points, faces, and move it, and you'll still keep that center zeroed out. And that's cool because then when you go to use things like Blue Wrench, your mirror modifier, it'll still mirror based off of this center. Now there are ways, if you go to object mode here, right? We're in object mode already, but if you go to the object menu, you will see that you can actually set your origin, right, kind of to the geometry. You can actually snap your cursor to the world origin, right? There's kind of lots of things you could do. You could even origin to 3D cursor, right? There's like lots of really neat things you can do with your origins and your cursor. It's just a lot easier to kind of keep that centered for right now until we take advantage of working with the cursor a little bit more. So one of the other things that's really, really cool about curves, and remember, this is already in a video that was already posted last week. One of the things about this curve is you'll notice we're seeing the geometry, but technically it's not finished yet. It's like our screw modifier, right? You still have the curve to edit. So with the NURBS curve object selected, if I hit 1, you'll notice it goes back into the curve mode. You can see the curve. You can actually grab the points to still edit and move the curve around, right? So you can kind of grab these points and move your curves around. And one of the things that's really, really cool about this curve feature, and your up arrow for more or less will work on curves also. So you notice if you use more or less, right, your up and down arrows, right? Remember, they're in the select menu. Although in curves, I'm not, there it is, yeah. So in the select menu for curves, right, in edit mode, you'll see there is more or less your up and down arrow, right? So you could still use up and down arrows for selecting more or less. That's growing and shrinking selections, right? And that works even on curves, which is really cool. Of course, like we've seen before on our revolves, if we wanted to, and I felt like I needed an extra point here, right? We select these two vertices, and that selects the segment. We can right-click. Wait for it to catch up. There we go. It's getting a little slow. There we go. Right-click, and at the very top of the curve context menu is Subdivide. And what it does is it puts a point in there. So remember, we can, of course, grab the endpoints and extrude, Control-E, to add more to the ends of the curve. But you can also just select kind of any two vertices anywhere or multiple and hit Subdivide, and it kind of sees those as edges then, and it puts a vertex in the center there. So once you get used to it, it's actually a quite fast, easy way to work with curves, adding more curve at the bottom and the end, adding kind of vertices where you want them to do more control. It's a bit different than, say, Maya for some of you guys that use Maya, but it's still pretty user-friendly and pretty cool. And of course, remember, there is usually there's this green guy right towards the bottom, right? That kind of gives you super, super specific properties for lights, curves, and things like that. So sometimes you'll see I go down to the green at kind of what looks like a curve here. And when I click on that, we saw that you could turn your resolution preview down, right? So that kind of really lets you kind of control how much geometry is this way, right? See, as we kind of turn that down, you'll see how it kind of gets less and less here, this direction, right? I think 2 is good, though. But if we scroll down, there is a geometry menu, right? And in that geometry menu, you'll see there's a resolution that controls kind of how much geometry goes around this way, right? So this resolution control right here controls how much geometry goes around that way. Just like this one up here controls how much kind of goes this way. So they're in 2 different areas, but resolution here and in the geometry menu, resolution there in the bevel, kind of control how many edge loops you'll have this direction, how many you'll have this direction. And we also saw that in that bevel section of geometry is depth. And this is controlling the thickness of your pipe, right? Now, in this case, we're not going to really use it here, but you'll notice that you can actually select an object to extrude. So if you ever actually create your own shape and you don't want it to just be a tube or a pipe or a hose, you can actually do that. You can actually pick the bevel object to be the shape, right? We're not going to do that on this one, right? We kind of do have some of these object picking we could do, but here we just want it to be a tube, right? We just want it to be a tube. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate some of that stuff a little bit because that was in the earlier videos, but I want to talk about it a little bit more. It never hurts to see it in multiple videos, right? Here's something super cool, though, that Blender's curves can do. I can go in here and I can just left-click drag, right? Because even when you're in Move Tool, right, you still have kind of your box select. You can just left-click drag and use this box. But if that box touches, it'll select. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that we can actually duplicate just these vertices from this curve. So not only can you duplicate a whole curve, but you can actually duplicate parts of a curve, right? Now, how do we duplicate? Well, one of the things you'll notice is Control D. Remember how we have that duplicate from our polygon stuff we did on our crab? Remember we could select some polygons and then we could just hit Control D and it would duplicate those polygons off. Same thing here, and it keeps them as part of the same object. So if I just do Add Duplicate or Control D, you will notice when it catches up, it actually took just those vertices and copied that off, and it's still all part of the same object. So isn't that actually really cool? That's one of the neat things I love about it. I'm like, I don't have to start a whole new curve. I can actually just take what I like from the original curve and totally adjust it, right? So you can actually take the whole curve if you wanted to, but you could just take part of the curve and just hit Control D like on polygons, and it just copies those. And it keeps them part of that original NURBS curve object, right? See how it didn't create a second NURBS curve? It's just part of this one. So that's one of the cool things I wanted to show you guys on this, was that you can actually, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we did last week, right? But I also wanted to talk about the fact that you can actually just duplicate, right? You can copy the whole curve or just certain parts of the curve, right? You don't have to copy the whole curve, and it's as easy as Control D, something we already know and have used for copying polygons off, and we'll see that more as we go on throughout the year on other stuff. And it works just like it does in polygons, except it's working with a curve, right? So just a little more about the fact that you can subdivide, that you can add to extrusions, but that you can even just select and hit Control D and create that curve. And then I could just Control E to extrude more for this curve, right? And if I want, right, I don't like this, I can just select those, hit delete, right? Segments, and that gets rid of those, right? So once you start to actually work with curves, particularly with this kind of bevel feature, Blender's curve stuff's pretty cool, right? We have kind of this really easy way to make hoses and pipes, and even kind of create multiple hoses and pipes that we can easily adjust and play with as we go. So remember, if you just want more pipes and hoses, feel free to just select those guys, Control D, and then you can put another pipe back here. And you don't have to keep drawing new curves, right? You can easily just go in here and kind of make cool little adjustments. So we can easily get ourselves lots of piping for this power unit, this mainframe unit, whatever you really want it to be, right? I called it a mainframe, but it could be like a wall power unit or something like that. And you see it keeps these all part of the same object, right? And it really just kind of allows us to go in here and make some cool little adjustments. They're all still editable points. And they're all part of that same initial NURBS curve. So really, really cool. Now in this case, I'm going to go to 4, back to object mode, because at this point, they're still curves, right? They're not truly polygons yet. We can't edit the polygons. So what I'm going to do, and you'll notice your bevel width depth will actually control this for all of them, just like your resolution. So if you really wanted them to be different thicknesses, you probably would want to create them as different curves or separate them, right, like we've done before. But in this case, I'm fine with them being all the same height and width. I was kind of cool with that, although I think I'm going to maybe quickly adjust this one really quick. Come on, Blender, catch up. There we go. Occasionally gets slowed down because, like I said, I'm kind of trying to screen share and video capture and run Blend at the same time, and it's working pretty well. But you'll occasionally need a little bit of lag. So go back to 4 for object, right? And remember, right-click, right? Remember, right-click in Blender, particularly when using industry compatible, brings up your context menus for that particular selection type you're in. If it's curves, it'll bring up the tools you can use for that specific curve that are available. If it's objects, object mode. And you'll see, and you remember this from our screw. Remember we did that screw, which is really not only a screw modifier, but it's technically also a revolve modifier. We saw that for our lamp. So remember, when you actually want to take a curves object that you've done some neat stuff to with either the screw modifier or this bevel that's part of the curve itself, you see you need to convert it to mesh, right? So when you right-click, there is an option, Convert to Mesh. And what that does, it allows you to convert this to full object. So now we'll see when we go in here, it's all object options there. You see when we go to face mode, we can see faces, and we can do modeling there. In this case, I'm going to go to 3 for face mode. There we go. And I'm just going to grab a couple of faces on those guys. Remember, select linked. Since I'm on my new computer, I haven't assigned my own quickies yet. So remember, select linked is actually that bracket key, right? I can hit delete to delete those faces, right? Remember, delete, when you hit it, brings up the delete context menu, which gives you many options, faces. And of course, I'm going to put a mirror modifier back on this. So I'm going to go 4 for object. I'm going to go to add modifier, and I'm going to go to mirror. I don't need clipping on for this one because there's nothing at the center that needs to kind of stay together, right? So clipping is awesome, but it's not always necessary for everything. And of course, I've got my axis picked by default. Remember, we always like to turn that triangle on, right? See that triangle right there? Right there, guys. I still kind of occasionally see some of you guys that forget to turn the triangle on, right? And that's okay, but it's nice, right? That kind of lets you see the full edit mode, right? If that triangle's off, you notice how it kind of makes it only so that you can see the faces and the selections on one side. So this is kind of turning on your visibility to show the full modifier and full edit mode, right? So I always like having that on. If you're working in 2.83 still, you should definitely get 2.9. That's why you might not have found Extrude Manifold. That triangle is still there. It's just kind of on the back, right? It's kind of at the back here instead of in the front. This is still pretty much the same. They just slightly reorganized the look of things and some positioning of some of the parts. Now, one of the things I wanted to show you guys before we're done for today is, and we'll probably still do a little bit more of this later on, and then we'll kind of do the actual room and probably one more object for our room, is I wanted to show you guys that extrude along normal again, right? So in this case, I'm just going to maybe go to my tweak tool. Right, I like my tweak tool a lot. And I'm in 3 for face mode. And remember, Q toggles you through those unless you assign your own quick keys. Now remember, if you're in face mode, you could select the face loop simply just by double-clicking on kind of like, say, an edge in the direction you want to go, right? I want to select the face loop this way, right? So if I double-click right around this edge, it selects the face loop going that way. It took me a little while to figure that out in Blender, and when I did, I fell in love with the way the face loop is done in Blender. So you basically just kind of select the edge that's kind of in between the polygons in the direction you want to go, right? So if I did, that, remember, Shift adds, Shift always adds, Shift double left click. And remember, you can deselect these, Control double left click will deselect. And one of the things you can see, those really work quite reliably in Blender. So I did kind of want to select these ends here because oftentimes pipes and hoses kind of have that ridging at the end where they connect to a part. So how would we do this? So this is one of those things where you might think, I'm just going to use Control E for extrude, right? Which, guys, I'm about to do, I'm going to do it wrong to show you what happens when you do it wrong. So don't do it exactly what I'm doing right now. But if I do Control E and I middle mouse click, that's what's going to happen. Guys, does that look like that's going right? Nope, right? That's not going right. So I do want to extrude, but I want to not use the regular kind of view extrude, regular extrude region, right? We don't want to use extrude region. So if I right click, you'll notice we have extrude faces, which is basically extrude region. But right below that is extrude faces along normals. And remember, we've talked about this. This has occasionally been a vocab word for us, normal direction. That is which direction your polygons are facing, right? Which direction your polygons are facing. So when you extrude faces along normals, it's going to extrude outward along each face's own unique direction. So watch what happens when I do extrude faces along normals. It gives me this little kind of handle, but you see how they kind of extrude out according to their own direction? And now we have kind of that cool little kind of ridging along the pipes. So a lot of the time, extrude region is what you're going to use for probably 70% of your modeling. But there are some times where that extrude along normal direction is awesome. One last thing before I stop, and we'll talk about it a little bit more when we finish this up in our next video, is if I hit R for scale, you're going to notice that my scale tool by default is kind of set to the center. And you'll notice when I try to scale those in, it kind of does this, right, with the middle mouse button. Not exactly ideal. If you go up to here, you'll see right at the top here is global, and then it looks like a kind of a chain link, right? Now in this case, global's fine. We'll leave that off for now. I'm going to show you guys a little more on our next videos later this week. But the one that looks like a chain link that's kind of next to the magnet, magnets are snap tools. We'll see that a little more on this project too. But if I click on this chain link, you will notice that we can set the position, right? This is the pivot point to the bounding box, to the cursor, to the median point, which is what it is by default, or to individual origins. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick this link, and I'm going to go to individual origins. And it doesn't look like it, but you'll notice now when I scale, you see how each one is scaling individually? So there is a distinct difference between individual origins and median point. Median point is kind of just set to world by default, the center position of everything. Whereas when we click on this link and we go to individual origins, it's kind of treating each one as kind of its own local. So believe it or not, if you need to use that, Blender's actually got really good reorientation systems. It's actually kind of up there with Modo. Maya was never bad, but I always just thought Modo blew it out of the water. And Blender actually is kind of right up there with Modo when you get used to it. It's actually pretty neat. So believe it or not, Blender has the ability to reorient your manipulators in some quite cool and excellent ways. And I just want to start to get you guys to see that. You might not even need it on this project, but I figured I want to start to get you guys to see your snapping tools and these options a little more, even if you don't need them, right? So I figured I'd kind of just finish that little part off for this one today. So I think that'll be a great place to probably just stop the recording when it catches up. Come on.